Hello, welcome to the video on writing up the research. This video will focus more in on the writing for the thesis. However, in places I will mention the strategic commercialization plan. The reason why I don't focus in on writing up the research for the strategic commercialization plan is that this plan is unique to you, to your business, to your idea. So we will look at the structure of the strategic commercialization plan, but won't specifically focus in on each section of that plan. However, some of the guidelines and practical tips contained within this video will also be of some use to you. So in writing up the research, start early. A very simple thing is to open up a couple of blank pages in Microsoft Word and start writing. Just start writing introduction, do up a table of contents, think about the structure and layout as per the guidelines for your thesis or for your strategic commercialization plan. And save it. Save it as a file so that you can actually then come back and populate the various sections or the headings that you've already started writing on. Be persuasive. You must convince your readers of the credibility of your conclusions, and this is very much so for both the thesis and the strategic commercialization plan. For your commercialization plan, you're trying to convey and convince investors or enterprise boards or a panel that this business is viable, it is investable, and you want them to actually realize that yes, it is a valuable contribution that you are making and they want to get involved in this business. For the thesis, you are showing that your findings are actually important, they're relevant and they're valid. And you're making recommendations and conclusions for stakeholders that can be impacted by this thesis. Get feedback, and this is feedback from even your peers who are doing either the thesis or the strategic commercialization plan, going up to the writing centre and talking to them about your writing, but also from your supervisor. And also give your supervisor plenty of time to review the draft that you've actually submitted. I actually had a student once submit his whole thesis a day or two before the deadline day, and he expected me to read it. I said no, because for a full thesis, it would actually need to take about 2 weeks to view it from front to cover, so that basically we are giving enough feedback to the individual. So give plenty of time and plenty of notice. Watch your writing style, watch your language that you're using in both instances. For the thesis and the strategic commercialization plan, you are actually business writing. And consider the structure of your writing. Every section should actually be written in a style and a layout that is appropriate to the message you're trying to convey. Try and consider having a common thread throughout your chapters in your thesis or in the sections of your strategic commercialization plan. So another practical tip is non-sexist writing, and the British Sociological Association provides very good general and specific advice about this issue, and I have the web link there. So I would actually look at ensuring that your grammar is correct, the phrasing is right, and the context that you're putting it into is also correct. This is some guidelines that I've received from the internet about the ways of structuring an argument. And this is for, let's say, a thesis on introduction, literature review, research methods, findings, discussion, and conclusion. And the phrases are used throughout the introduction would be, in this thesis, I will argue that, or it is often argued that, or it is argued here, or it could be argued that. And then you're linking back, and it goes back to my thread of conversation. In the literature review, you can revert back to maybe the introduction where it was previously argued. The research methods, following the arguments put forward by Wilmot 1999, this thesis is adopting a qualitative approach that's appropriate for this particular study. And then the results and findings, this shows or this demonstrates and this implies that from this it is suggested. And then the discussion and conclusion, again, you're bringing back the argument that was presented maybe in the literature review or even in the introduction. And then in the conclusion, in this thesis, I have argued for, or I conclude that, or I have argued for a more theoretical foundation being provided, etc. So that's something to think about, but also this could be good for your strategic commercialization plan. In a sense, you're putting forward an argument for the investing of the investors in your business, or the support from the enterprise board or the government agency or whoever you're presenting your strategic commercialization plan. Now here you would obviously not be using dissertation, you would not be necessarily using a large volume of literature, but it could be that there is a government report that actually states very much so the development of a market, and there you can actually say, you know, it is argued by Forfos, or it is argued by the Irish government that more focus needs to be placed on this particular area, and which this business plan or the strategic commercialization plan is actually going to try and bridge that gap. So even these terminologies could be actually somewhat brought into your strategic commercialization plan. So what is the format you can adopt for the strategic commercialization plan? This is a template, but basically it should be modified to adhere to the specific business or founder requirements. So there is flexibility here in the strategic commercialization plan. The first bit is a confidentiality agreement, and that can be upfront, and you can actually ask the reader to sign the confidentiality agreement. You need an executive summary, and that's based on mission statement and objectives. And then your company and corporate structure. That's if you are adopting a company structure. You need an introduction, company information, lots of information on the promoters and the team. Going back to what I was saying about investors investing in the individual. So make sure there's plenty of information there. Use visuals if you want as well. The board of advisors or the board of directors, if appropriate. Then the product and service solution, you're describing the product or service, you're highlighting the key features and benefits, what is the value proposition, the technology and innovation, the IP, the research and development that has been done to date, and what is anticipated. Then the market analysis, the market size and trends, and here you may include some facts and figures from reports that have viable standing in the readings. And then the market structure, the location, the target market segments. So we're going from the macro perspective, now we're going down to the micro, identifying the competitive positioning and advantage and the key customers. So choosing the commercialization path, and then, you know, identifying the IP issues, and here, you know, ensuring that you identify what is IPable, explaining the process, explaining to date where the IP actually is. Are there licensing options? What about technology transfer options and the implications of that? Then we have marketing and sales. The marketing strategy, advertising, promotion, revenue, sales strategy, sales forecasts. Then we have operations and execution, or the business model. So again, we can here have a common thread, reiterate some of the content that we had earlier when we were identifying the promoters or the team. Here we're going into the management, the organization, the resourcing, the development, the operations. Then we have the exit strategy, plan for termination of any licensing or strategic alliance agreement. What about considering selling the business? If you've got investors, how do they actually exit the business? Then the financial projections are key assumptions, P&L accounts, balance sheets, cash flow projections and funding requirements. These should be done on a 3-year cycle, and the cash flow 12 months for the first year and end of year cash flow statements for year 2 and year 3. And then the appendices has the key information that needs to be in bulk format, and maybe copies of surveys, copies of testimonials, etc. So that's the strategic commercialization plan format. The features of the plan include viability, visibility, capability and credibility. These are 4 important elements that have to apply to the business and to the product or service. Please refer back to page 2 of your strategic commercialization plan guidelines, where you will actually find more information on each of these 4 features of the plan. So what is the possible structure of a thesis? Well, a thesis has title page, acknowledgement and declaration. It has an abstract. It has the table of contents. So the first 3 elements are title page, acknowledgements and declarations on the next page. Then we have the abstract, then the table of contents. Page 1 starts at the introduction. Page 1 through to 4, or however long you believe the introduction is needed. Then you've got the next chapters are covering the literature review. It could be 1 chapter, it could be a series of chapters. The next section then is research methods, describing the methodology that you adopted for the thesis, your rationales for that, your understanding of that, your sampling methods, your recording, even mentioning the research ethics here as well. After your methods, you have the results. The results, you basically present your results as they are. Now, if you're doing a case method, you would write up each individual case, and then you have cross-case analysis. If you have statistical results, you would present the tables, the charts, the pie charts, and illustrations of the results with some written content. Then you have your discussion. Here now you integrate, in a sense, your literature review findings with your research methods, with your results, and you discuss them. And then you have your conclusion. And you even could have conclusion and recommendations. Then you have your references and then your appendices. Research titles. Titles describes or states the exact research title or topic. Good titles are concise, clear and informative. Poor titles are long-winded, obscure and do not convey the gist of the study. However, point to note, leave your title until the very end. Wait until you have the study done, and then the title will emerge. You can have a working title as you go along, but don't ground it in anything until you are finished. In the acknowledgements, acknowledge those involved, your supervisor, maybe your family, your friends, the participants in the study, in the survey or in the interviews. So acknowledge those and then declare the authenticity of the work. For example, this project is solely the work of the author and the submitted and partial fulfillment of the requirement of the degree of MBA or the degree of Master of International Entrepreneurship Management or whatever program you are studying. Then have a signature and a date. That is declaring you have actually taken this information, you've not plagiarized it, you are fulfilling the requirements of your degree program. In your abstract, it's a short summary of the entire report. Again, this actually is done at the very end. It's a brief rationale for the study, the aims or hypotheses of the study, an overview of the method, any key results. Not all of them, just the key one. And it should be a page long. Here it could be single line spaced if the rest of your thesis is in double line spacing or whatever line spacing you've adopted. Then you have your table of contents, and your table numbering should be in Roman numerals up to the introduction. The first page of the introduction is in Arabic numeral 1. The table of tables should be given a separate page. The table of figures should be given a separate page as well. Appendices don't need page numbering. Microsoft Word now has the ability to do a table of contents, and that could be the first thing you can actually start doing, is doing out a structure of your thesis based on a table of contents here, or doing your strategic commercialization plan based on the guidelines on page 2 of your handout. So in your introduction, you should explain what you are writing about, why it's important. Simply stating that it interests you because of a long-standing personal interest is not enough. Here you should be actually showing the reason and the necessity for this study. You might indicate in general terms the theoretical approach or perspective you will be using and why, and you should outline your research question and or objectives. The introduction sets the stage, thus it should contain a very brief review of relevant literature, rationale, aims and objectives. Introduction does not have a conclusion. The introduction can end with a thesis layout section outlining the structure of the thesis and having 2 or 3 or 4 lines on each of the chapters of the thesis. Again, this is very much a work in progress, the introduction, because you only really can write this last part of the introduction when you have your whole thesis laid out. After the introduction is the literature review. You need to have an introduction, and you should provide the reader with the scale and structure of your review. It serves as a roadmap. Then you have the body of the review. It depends on how you've organized your key points. Literature reviews at master's level should be evaluative and not merely descriptive. So we would be taking the arguments for and against something, or showing the progression of the theory through the works of individuals. At the end of the literature review, it needs a conclusion, and this needs to sum up the main findings of your research into the literature. The findings can be related to the aims of the study you are proposing to do. The reader is provided with a coherent background to the study, and that's what the literature review is doing, providing a background. So review the main ideas and research relating to your area of interest, and you don't summarize the relevant literature. You need to be critical. You should review the literature as a means of showing why your research questions are important. So go back to the video that we discussed on doing a literature review. Reflect on the points raised in the presentation by the speaker from the Writing Centre. So bear in mind that you will want to return to the literature you examine in the discussions of your findings and conclusions. Do not try to get everything you read into a literature review. Try and be as critical as possible, and where it's appropriate, include it. Where it's not, don't include it. You should not stop reading the literature once you begin designing your research. You should constantly go back to the literature because there might be new articles or new opinions that could be important for your study. So in presenting the literature, Gordon Beidel and Locke, 1993 and 1997, said that good articles develop a story. And how can these stories actually be developed? Well, there's 2 ways or processes that the literature is conveyed. One is constructing intertextual coherence, or problematizing the situation. So in intertextual coherence, there's actually 3 elements to that, and that's synthesized coherence, progressive coherence, or non-coherence. And what are these techniques, and how can you use them? Well, the synthesized coherence puts work together that is generally considered unrelated, theory and research previously regarded as unconnected are pieced together, whereby progressive coherence portrays the build-up of an area of knowledge around which there is considerable consensus. whereby non-coherence is recognition that there may be many contributions to a certain research program, but there is considerable disagreement among practitioners. So you need to review what approach you want to adopt. You should try and adopt one and build that into your literature review structure. Problematizing the situation is where you're locating the problem in the literature. And it could be that you're showing there is a gap and it's incomplete, or it's inadequate. It maybe has overlooked ways of looking at it that can be greatly improved, and maybe alternative perspectives or frameworks can then be introduced. It could also be incommensurate, and this is where one argues for an alternative perspective that is superior to the literature as it stands, and it differs from inadequate problematizing because it portrays the existing literature as wrong, misguided, or incorrect. Now, at master's level, I would not necessarily be looking for this type of structuring of the literature, but if you can, well and good. But more at PhD level, you'll be looking at incommensurate problematizing the situation. So after your literature review, we next have the research methods. And the research methods could also be influenced from the literature review that you've conducted. And you could be showing that other researchers have adopted certain approaches and styles, and you're going to actually follow through from their approach and adopt a similar one to your own research. So in the research methods, you need to outline your research design and sampling approach, how access was achieved if relevant, then the procedures you used, for example, following up with non-respondents, the nature of your questionnaire, the nature of your interview or observation schedule, how things were coded, how it was framed. Also, we might identify how non-response was dealt with, whether or not you took notes during interviews or observations, coding matters, and how you proceeded with your analysis. When discussing each of the above points, you should describe and defend the choice that you made. Why did you use a postal questionnaire rather than a structured interview? Why you focused on that particular population for sampling purposes? So here we're bringing in some unique observations to your particular study. So we are reflecting on other people's approaches or other research that was conducted that has influenced your study, but you're then explaining in a number of sentences why it was appropriate for this study. So this part of a research paper describes how the study was carried out. It should contain enough detail that replication of the study by another researcher can easily be done. So how do we actually write up the research method? There are 4 sections. That is design, subjects, materials, equipment, apparatus, and then procedure. So using those sections to actually write your methodology is appropriate. Then we have the results, and it presents the unique findings of the study and highlights points of interest. For quantitative research, these findings are usually presented in some combination of text, tables, and figures. For qualitative research, the findings are reported as text, supported by quotes where applicable. Tabulations may also be used, and those tabulations could be relevant text from your interview schedules. Whichever approach you take, try not to present and discuss all of your results. Only include the relevant information that's relevant to your research question. Quite importantly, and this is something that constantly comes out in research when I read it, do not just summarise what a table shows. You should point to salient aspects of the table's graphs or other forms of analysis you present from the point of view of your research questions. So highlight the key observations, but don't reiterate everything that is presented in the table. Avoid simply presenting graphs, tables, or sections of the transcript of a semi-structured interview or focus group session without any comment whatsoever, because the reader is left wondering why you think the finding is important. It is good to vary the method of presenting quantitative findings, interspersed between pie charts, bar charts, scatter graphs, tables, etc. A particular problem that is associated with qualitative research is what to leave out. The key guideline I can give you is be selective and select only those sections that relate directly to your research questions. You can actually break up your results chapter into separate headings. One could be the demographic profile of your respondents and maybe answering your first two research hypotheses. And then the next chapter could be in relation to the latter hypothesis. And then your discussion chapter. This discusses the results with reference to the aims or hypotheses of the study, other results, previous studies reviewed in the introduction, or even in your literature review, the identification of your strengths and limitations of the study, alternative possible explanations of the findings. So what's important in your discussion chapter is the results are not repeated, but interpreted in this section. And this is where you bring in your literature review chapters. It draws out the implications for practice or makes suggestions for future research. You reflect on the implications of your findings for the research questions that had driven your research. In other words, how do your results illuminate your research questions? If you have any specified hypotheses, the discussion will address whether the hypotheses have been confirmed or not. If not, you may explain or speculate on the reasons for and the implications of their refutation. And then we have the conclusion. A conclusion is not the same as a summary. It is useful to bring out your argument thus far, relating your findings and discussion to your research question, and hammering home to your readers the significance of what you have done. Yes, you clarify the implications of your research for your research questions, might suggest ways in which your findings have implications for theories relating to your areas of interest, might suggest ways in which your findings have implications for practice in the field of business and management, and thus identifying the implications for key stakeholders. With the benefit of hindsight, you might draw attention to any limitations of your study, but don't overdo this section. And you might actually propose areas of further research that are suggested by your findings. Your references are adhering to the Harvard referencing method as outlined in Cited Right, and also as reflected in the video on how to reference. And then appendices and obligations. Appendices, you might include things like a questionnaire, interview schedule, letters sent to your respondents. But also don't forget the obligations. In your research ethics form, you might actually say that you will not identify any key individuals. So you include your research ethics form in your appendices, but also you may have an obligation of saying you would send out copies of the study to individuals. Please ensure that you maintain that. So finally, the last few slides are taken from the guidelines of your thesis or the guidelines of your strategic commercialisation plan. So the submission date for the final report is Friday, the 12th of September 2014 by 3 o'clock. Submit 2 copies of the final thesis to Kathy Ryan in the Postgrad and Executive Education Office, and you must submit a soft copy of the thesis to Briga Hines. The text should be a standard 12 pitch, typeface, double or 1.5 line spacing, long quotations greater than 20 words, must be in single line spacing. You must do it on double side printing as well, and here's how you set up your margins for that. Pages should be numbered from chapter 1 to the references. It should be 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. The cover page does not have a page number. Tables are rows and columns, whereby figures are illustrations, charts, etc. And finally, binders. You need to ensure that you give plenty of time to the binders, and 2 particular binders that are used on campus are Curly Copy Centre or Harry Getlovog, and you need to also adhere to the covering colour that is appropriate for master's level. I hope this video has been useful to you, and I look forward to reading your thesis or your strategic commercialisation plan.